Hi, welcome to the Week 3 show. By the time you see this, Week 3 will be in the books. I will be recording this before the Monday night game between Dallas and Philadelphia. But Week 4 is going to be coming up quick. Time to get ready for that. So let's do this. For tonight's game, a few things I'm going to be looking at is the split between Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. This has been a very close split so far in the first two games. I want to see if that continues. If it does, both guys are viable starters at running back and flex. Second question, Amari Cooper got a rib injury in week 2, and he was taken off the injury report at the end of the week, and he's going tonight. But rib injuries can be tricky. And if you're a DeAndre Hopkins owner, you know that. So the question is, how healthy is Amari Cooper going to be tonight? And the final thing is, this is going to be a very good test for the Philadelphia defense, which to this point has been very good. So I want to see how they do against a high-powered offense. So let me run through a few news items real quick. Buffalo ran a ridiculous, I think it was 77 plays on Sunday, and pretty much everybody on that team ate, with maybe the exception of Devin Singletary. That offense is going to be a great offense to have pieces of, and we'll talk about some of those guys a little bit later. On the downside, the Bears' offensive line looks like it's going to be a huge problem. Cleveland just manhandled them yesterday, and Justin Fields had absolutely no chance. He was sacked 9 times. They only ran about 42 plays, including the sacks, and nobody on that offense really did anything. And that's something to keep an eye on, because outside of David Montgomery and Allen Robinson, I'm not sure I want anybody on that offense in my starting lineup on a regular basis. Justin Tucker made a ridiculous 66-yard record field goal yesterday that hit the crossbar and fell over. It's the second time the Lions have lost on a record-setting field goal on the last play of the game. First time was a long time ago, but you kind of feel bad for them. The Saints appear to be perfectly content being a good defensive team and a running team, especially when they get in a positive game script. Jameis Winston has yet to throw more than 22 times in a game. And I think if they can manage that, they got a lot healthier on defense and looked really good against New England yesterday. Rookie quarterbacks appear to be limiting any ceiling that those offensive players might have. Trevor Lawrence is struggling with turnovers. He had 4 yesterday. Mac Jones threw 3 interceptions yesterday. Zach Wilson has not been very effective at all the last 2 weeks. Trey Lance has barely gotten on the field. He actually has 2 touchdowns in limited time. And Justin Fields, we saw just get absolutely obliterated yesterday. So I'm not real crazy about the rookie quarterbacks right now. I am going forward and maybe even later in the season, but for right now, I am keeping a very serious eye on those offensive teams. Christian Kirk is a must-own. My knock against Christian Kirk always has been the amount of opportunities he's had. Well, this year he's getting those opportunities, especially with DeAndre Hopkins limited by his rib injury. Tampa Bay's secondary looks to be their Achilles heel, and they had another guy go down yesterday, Jamel Dean, and the Rams shredded him. Matt Stafford was a surgeon and took them apart. So that's a situation to keep an eye on, especially if you have their defense. Alexander Mattison got an opportunity yesterday with Dalvin Cook out, and that was a situation I've been kind of watching all week. Madison cashed in with 171 yards from scrimmage and 6 receptions. He didn't get into the end zone, but that's still a pretty terrific day. A couple of other things. Andy Reid was hospitalized yesterday after the game. I can't imagine that helped them during the game. But it sounds like Andy Reid's going to be okay and will probably be on the sideline again this Sunday. So that's really good news. And a little under the radar trade, Jacksonville and Carolina made a trade. Cornerback CJ Henderson went to Carolina to help shore up their defense. And he's a former first-round pick. So even if he doesn't play a starting role, he will help. But tight end Dan Arnold went to Jacksonville. And I've been kind of sounding the bell for James O'Shaughnessy, who ended up going on injured reserve with his ankle injury. So Dan Arnold's a guy I'm going to be keeping my eye on going forward. Let's talk about some of the injuries that happened this week. The big one being Christian McCaffrey's hamstring injury, of course. It sounds like he avoided serious injury. It sounds like it may be a grade 1 strain. So far, he has not been placed on injured reserve. I would not be surprised to see him miss 2 or 3 games. Both wide receivers for the Giants, Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton, went out with hamstring injuries. The beneficiary there was Colin Johnson, somebody to keep an eye on if those injuries are serious. They're both hamstring injuries. You never know with those. James White suffered a hip injury that just did not look good for the Patriots yesterday. He was carted off, and he did not come back, and I would not be surprised if he misses quite a bit of time. The Saints' offensive line was already without center Eric McCoy, and left tackle Teron Armstead went down yesterday, and he's already been placed on injured reserve. Keep an eye on that offensive line. They're going to need them if they want to be that running team. The Steelers' offensive line wasn't stout to begin with, but they lost yesterday Kendrick Green, the center, and right tackle Chuck Okorafor. And keep an eye on those injuries. So far, they haven't been able to do anything in the running game, really, even though Najee Harris is a must start. And he had 14 receptions yesterday. So I'm not really worried about Najee Harris. I am worried a little bit about Ben Roethlisberger. They had another injury. Wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster bruised his ribs. It doesn't sound serious. Keep an eye to see if he plays this week. Deontay Johnson missed the game with his knee injury. And if that's true, I'm keeping my finger on the button for James Robinson. DeAndre Hopkins is severely limited with his rib injury, and that's something to keep an eye on. He was a game-time decision yesterday, and I'm looking at that going forward. The Cardinals' offensive line also suffered a couple of injuries to their depth. So keep an eye on their injury report this week to see how those linemen are doing. For the Jets, Elijah Moore suffered a concussion, and Tyler Kroft had a chest injury. Keep an eye on those injuries. To me, Moore is a guy worth rostering, so I'm keeping my eye on the situation. Denver, KJ Hamler suffered a knee injury, and it was reported this morning that it was torn ACL, so he's done. Tim Patrick becomes a must-own even when Jerry Jeudy comes back, which sounds like it's still a few weeks away. The 49ers secondary has just been banged up all year, and Josh Norman got hurt last night. It sounds like he bruised his lungs, which I don't know if it's going to keep him out any time, but it just doesn't sound good. And Aaron Rodgers was able to attack them at will last night. The defensive line was good for the 49ers. The front seven did their job, but the secondary didn't really hold up. Chris Carson suffered a hamstring injury. Keep an eye on that situation. I haven't heard how serious or not serious it is. If so, Alex Collins is a big Pete Carroll guy. Keep an eye out for Alex Collins and possibly Rashad Penny getting activated. And Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who I had kind of taken off my watch list and was ready to put back on, also had a hamstring injury. So keep an eye on that situation. Now, for the first time, I want to talk about some guys to drop. Haven't really mentioned it going in, but some of the guys that probably aren't rostered in a lot of leagues anyway, but that I'm definitely getting rid of if I have them. I was going to say Ramondre Stevenson, but with the James White injury, I'm not real crazy about Brandon Bolden and J.J. Taylor. It's possible Stevenson gets activated if White is seriously injured, as it appears. Wayne Gallman has been a healthy scratch all year, and it looks like Cordero Patterson has got that second running back job nailed down. Patterson's a must-start flex. I don't see Gallman having any value. For the Chargers, Joshua Kelly looks to be buried on the depth chart behind Austin Eckler, Justin Jackson, and Larry Roundtree. Eckler's really the only guy right now that has any value. If he stays healthy, great. The first guy I'd be going after if he doesn't is Justin Jackson. And then maybe Joshua Kelly has some modest value, but I'm not holding out hope for that. Marlon Mack looks to be buried well behind Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines. So I think if you've got him, you can cut bait. Rashad Perriman was an early draft season darling when he was on the Lions, but he ended up getting cut, and then he signed with the Bears. I'm not a big fan of the Bears offense. If Rashad Perriman is even anywhere on your radar, he can be gone. Let's talk about some of the more owned guys. Amon-Ra St. Brown. That offense appears to be mostly DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams, and TJ Hawkinson. And even yesterday, TJ Hawkinson had a very modest game. He had 2 targets, 2 catches, 10 yards. I don't think St. Brown needs to be owned. Another guy that I was going to recommend moving on, if he's on your radar anywhere, was Josh Reynolds of the Tennessee Titans. But I'm still going to keep an eye on him with the A.J. Brown hamstring injury. To see how serious that is, it's possible he gets activated if A.J. Brown misses time. So if you want to move on, fine. If you don't, fine. Now let's talk of some of the more owned guys. Adam Troutman for the Saints. Saints don't look like they have a potent passing game at all. They may when Michael Thomas returns, and maybe you want to revisit their passing offense then. But if you got Troutman on your roster, I think you can drop him. The Washington football team defense was probably drafted top 5 in all drafts that have defense and special teams. It's time to move on. They've got 6 sacks in 3 games, 2 turnovers, and they have given up a bunch of points, even to the New York Giants. It's time to stream if you've got Washington. Robbie Anderson was a mid-round draft choice, and he looks like he is being relegated to the bench. He, outside of a 57-yard touchdown catch he had in week 1, he hasn't really done anything. And I'll talk about a guy that I'd rather keep my eye on. If Robbie Anderson's clogging up your roster, it may be time to move on. And finally, Matt Ryan at quarterback. It looks like it's pretty much the end of the road for Matt Ryan. Their offense hasn't really been inspiring at all, and Ryan's hardly done anything. He's not mobile. So there are other guys that I would rather have besides Matt Ryan. If you are rostering him, he's your starting quarterback, I'm looking for somebody else. Even if he's my backup, I'm looking for somebody else. You're holding them in 2 quarterback leagues, of course, but I'm not crazy about them. Now, before I go on to this week's pickups and watch lists, I want to talk to you about bye weeks coming up. It's not too early to start planning. Week 6 doesn't have a lot of offensive firepower. The teams that are off are Atlanta, New Orleans, New York Jets, and the 49ers. There are guys on rosters from those teams, but it's not a devastating bye week. The big bye week comes in week 7. That's a week that I am planning for already if I haven't started. It's the only 6-team bye week for 2021, and the teams that are going to be out are Buffalo, Dallas, Jacksonville, the Los Angeles Chargers, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh. There are a ton of guys on rosters from those teams. That was one of my early bugaboo bye weeks. I don't really, when I'm drafting, put much stock into how I do bye weeks. I can manage bye weeks, but I'm already planning for those 2 weeks. And we'll talk about some of the other bye weeks coming up in future shows. Now, this week, quarterbacks, I've already talked about Kirk Cousins. I've already talked about Derek Carr. I've already talked about Daniel Jones. They're still pretty widely available. Those are guys I like way more than Matt Ryan. And another guy I'm starting to warm up to is Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold's got 6 touchdowns, including 3 rushing touchdowns already. And he's a pretty mobile guy. He's not Lamar Jackson mobile. He's not Josh Allen mobile, but he's not Matt Ryan stationary. And he's 9th in passing yards. So he's a guy I'm at least keeping an eye on in 1 quarterback leagues. In 2 quarterback leagues, I talked about Davis Mills and Jacoby Brissett last week. And they both actually played pretty well. I know that Houston only had 9 points against a potent Carolina defense. But Davis Mills actually played pretty well, and he didn't turn the ball over. Jacoby Brissett almost won the game for the Dolphins, and he certainly made a bunch of their guys look very viable. So those guys are, if they're out there in 2 quarterback leagues, they're at least depth. Brissett may actually be startable. The first running back I want to mention is Chuba Hubbard, and that's a no-brainer with McCaffrey's injury. If he's on your waiver wire, you're going to spend your fab. You are going to use your number 1 waiver claim. Backup is Royce Freeman there, and I'm going to at least keep him on a watch list, and I'm definitely going to consider, if I have the depth, picking him up as well. Gio Bernard for Tampa Bay had 9 receptions yesterday for 51 yards. That's viable flex territory. And if Tampa Bay gets into a situation where they need to throw the ball a lot, he is going to be a guy you're probably going to hope is on your roster. Peyton Barber for the Raiders doesn't excite me. I'm not going to tell you to run out and pick him up. I'm not going to tell you not to. But as long as Josh Jacobs is hurt, Barber, he had a huge game yesterday. He had 3 catches, 31 yards, 23 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown. Yeah, I think he's got to be rostered for the time being. And James Conner looks like the goal line back for the Cardinals. He had 2 touchdowns yesterday. He didn't have a ton of yards, but he has been playing. And if he had fallen off your radar for any reason, or if somebody got impatient and dropped him, he's worth rostering. Now, my pickup of the week is going to be Hunter Renfrow of the Raiders. 3 games, he's got 22 targets, 16 catches, 204 yards, and a touchdown. And Derek Carr loves him. I know if Derek Carr could throw to Darren Waller all day, he would, but that's just not possible. Teams key on Darren Waller. Last week, I gave you Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore didn't work out too well, but I'm still rostering Rondale Moore. He's a rookie. He's going to be inconsistent, but that offense is great. So let's talk about another guy. I already talked about Christian Kirk being a must-own. A.J. Green in 3 games has had 18 targets, 10 receptions, 181 yards, and a touchdown, and it's definitely worth consideration. Last week, I talked about Emmanuel Sanders, and Emmanuel Sanders had a great game Sunday. Now, to be fair, Most everybody on Buffalo had a great game Sunday. But through 3 games, Sanders has 20 targets, 11 receptions, 194 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's a rosterable guy to me. And if for some reason, I can't imagine in PPR leagues Cole Beasley would be available, but Beasley's a must roster. 30 targets in 3 games, 23 receptions, 194 yards. He doesn't have a touchdown yet, but he's a PPR guy. You got to have him. Sammy Watkins is a name that's familiar to a lot of people, usually the week 1 wonder, but through 3 games, Sammy Watkins has 22 targets, 12 receptions, and 208 yards. Doesn't have a touchdown, but I'm not sure he doesn't have some viability, even when Rashad Bateman comes back, which may be soon, may not. I haven't heard too much about Rashad Bateman. But to me, Sammy Watkins is a guy you can roster. Let's talk about some guys to watch. Carolina's Terrace Marshall looks like he's starting to emerge as the number 2 wide receiver on the Panthers. Maybe true, maybe not. Worth a watch. If you've got the room, I would take the chance and add him. He hasn't done a lot yet, but he has had his opportunities, and I don't see any reason to think that won't be valid going forward. For Detroit, Khalif Raymond's had a couple of decent games. He's only had 16 targets in 3 games, 11 receptions, 136 yards, no touchdowns, but he's a guy worth the watch. If Antonio Brown remains out, Tyler Johnson looks to be a guy that Tom Brady likes. Yesterday, he had 6 targets, 3 receptions, 63 yards. This is a deep dive. This is probably more a watch list than an ad. Deshaun Jackson got called out by Sean McVay saying he should be more involved. I'm not running out. I'm not dropping somebody big for Deshaun Jackson, but he's always been a big play guy. And if he can stay healthy, he had 5 targets, 3 receptions, 120 yards, and a long touchdown yesterday. I mentioned Valdez-Scantling being hurt earlier in the show. I'm still keeping an eye on him. Aaron Rodgers said the 4 targets he didn't catch in week 2 were not on Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They were on Aaron Rodgers, and he went to him. He had a 40-yard reception. He had 3 catches for 59 yards and a touchdown and 4 targets. Another guy that I'm keeping my eye on. And we had a Kendrick Bourne sighting yesterday. I'm not crazy about the Patriots offense, but if they have to throw a lot, there are going to be opportunities for their guys. Bourne had 8 targets, 6 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. I've always liked Kendrick Bourne. He doesn't seem to be a high pedigree guy, but that's a guy I'm going to keep my eye on. Let's talk about some tight ends. And this is pretty much dumpster diving outside of Mike Gesicki, who came back to life yesterday. He had 12 targets, 10 receptions, and 86 yards. I had pretty much gotten to the point where I was ready to move on from him, but he seems to be a favorite of Jacoby Brissett, and Tua is on the IR right now. So Brissett's going to have at least a couple of more starts. So I'm hanging on to Gesicki. In the game where Buffalo people ate, Dawson Knox had a very good game. And again, for tight ends, touchdowns are king. And even though Dawson Knox only has 12 targets in 3 games, 10 receptions, and 107 yards, he does have 2 touchdowns, and he's worth at least a watch. Tyler Conklin may be emerging in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins looks like he's going to have a career year. And even though my guy KJ Osborne didn't come through yesterday, he only had 2 targets and 2 receptions for 26 yards. Conklin had 8 targets, 7 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. It's worth at least a watch to see if that continues. And if it does, it's probably time to add him. Now, kicking streamers. I mentioned Brandon McManus last week, and right now he is kicker 2 on the year. And they've got Baltimore coming to Mile High Stadium, and I love McManus. I think he may not even be a streamer. He may be a guy to keep on your roster. And for Minnesota, Joseph is currently kicker number 5, and he will be more remembered for missing the game-winning field goal against the Cardinals. But they've got Cleveland coming in this week, and he's already made 3 50-yarders. So if you're looking for a couple of streamers at kicker, those are the guys. For defense, the Saints got very healthy this week. They looked great yesterday against the Patriots. They look like they're going to cause teams a lot of trouble, and they have the New York Giants at home this week, hopefully in the return to the Superdome. So for some reason, somebody dropped New Orleans, go snap them up for week 4 as a streamer at least. And Tennessee has got 2 nice matchups in the coming 2 weeks. They're both on the road, but they have the Jets and they have the Jaguars. And those are 2 teams I'm more than happy to stream defenses against. So if you're looking for somebody to put in your lineup, if you got Washington, you're tired of them, look at New Orleans, look at Tennessee, see if they're available. Now, before the show closes, I want to mention a couple of things. The fantasy community lost a giant this past weekend, and Mike Tagliere passed away from COVID at the very young age of 39. It's a complete tragedy. He was one of the most popular analysts in the business. He had been at Fantasy Pros for about 4 years, and I always looked for a Mike Tagliere byline. I always spent time reading, and I profited from what Mike left behind. Also, he left behind a wife and 2 children. So if you have any means at all, I would recommend going to GoFundMe.com/F/support-the-Tagliere-family. If you can afford even a couple of bucks, I know for a fact that they would very much be happy to have it. And like I said, I supported from Mike's work. I should say I profited from Mike's work, and I'm sure a lot of people did. So if you have any means at all, please go donate to their GoFundMe page. Couple of follows on Twitter I would like to recommend before we go. 32 in 32 Fantasy Football at 32IN32FF. And if you want to follow me, I am at CREWSER128. That's Cruiser 128. And remember, be respectful, be kind, have a great week, and I will see you back here next Tuesday.